Hey everyone, Coomber Radio, episode number 123, if my maths serves me correctly. Now, we are international again. I'm staying up late. I'm interviewing a man that is very much in the medical realm. He's going to be far more intelligent than I am, so you're in for a treat. You don't have to listen to my drivel the whole podcast, and Rachel obviously isn't here, so my guest today is Miles McDuff. Hello. No, McGuff.
McGuff, yes, like the crime dog, but no R.
You
guys probably don't know who the crime dog is over in Britain.
No, we don't. Who's the crime dog?
Crime dog is a little cartoon character that they use to, it's like a public service thing that they use to teach children how to, avoid strangers and, how to avoid crime situations. And
oh, right. No,
yeah, so everyone calls me McGruff. I'm McGuff.
We don't have the public funding for that. Like, everything's stretched. We just don't have money in the UK for anything.
It's dried up for us as well. He's been deceased for a few years.
Damn. Well, I've already butchered your name, so everything's a positive from now on, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you very much for taking the time to get in touch with.
It's my pleasure.
My audience today. There's going to be a huge amount of people that don't know who you are. I would say what you do is very niche. Please tell everyone who on earth is Doug McGuff.
Okay, so my main gig in life is I'm actually an emergency physician. But I came to medical school via an interest in athletics and strength training. I went to medical school simply because that pathway allowed me to learn more and more about the human body. But my actual specialty interest leaned towards emergency medicine, which is what I trained in and what I still do. I both participate in it and teach emergency medicine. But along the way, I maintained an interest in strength and conditioning and high-intensity strength training in particular. And in 1997, I opened my own personal training center, which is exclusively a one-on-one facility that supervises high-intensity strength training. So it's very high-intensity, brief duration, performed infrequently to produce the most amount of results possible with a minimal effective dose. My participation in that business spun off writing books that have resulted in a published book with my co-author John Little, which is Body by Science, which led to a blog, which led to podcasts such as this. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Nice. I'm intrigued by your gym. I didn't actually know this. You've got a gym that's solely set up literally to have people come in, and that's the only type of training that you do because that's kind of your philosophy behind the results that you want to get out of clients?
Yeah, and it's not at all your traditional gym. It is entirely a one-on-one personal training studio. So I have a handful of trainers that I have trained very specifically in a protocol that I like to use. Mm-hmm. And when a client comes in, the whole facility is probably about 1,200 square feet. The training area is probably about 900 square feet. And I've just hand-selected what I think is the best equipment for applying this type of high-intensity work. So the client comes in, they show up, they walk through some double doors, they go in the back, the door is shut. It's them and an instructor that is going to watch every second of every set, of every exercise from beginning to end to make certain that it is as difficult as possible. What we're trying to do is we are trying to exhaust and fatigue the muscle to the deepest level possible in the shortest amount of time. And when you do that, you get a workout of sufficient intensity that it generally will last 12 to 15 minutes. And that's all the client can take. And then we're done.
It sounds like you own the most hated facility in America.
Yeah, it's like going to the dentist every week. Now, my clients, they really do hate it. But it's amazing. I opened in 1997. I have clients that have been with me ever since then. Our retention rate's greater than 95%. Once someone comes, they stay. Wow. If they ever leave to go try something out, they always come back. and it's the results, and it's the time efficiency of it. I mean, you can put up with that kind of intensity when the results are forthcoming. But over time, also, people, I think, begin to enjoy the developing the ability to do hard things. It affects character in a way that is somewhat intangible, but is very, very real. And I think people really identify with that as part and parcel of what they're doing there. I mean, it's always a joke to come in dreading it, no, this is, but I think the ability to embrace the discomfort of what they're doing in order to go after the results that they want is a very empowering thing to them.
Yeah, because if you can handle a high intensity exercise, you think about the level of resolve that creates in your character for all the other things in life. I mean, I know gazillions of people that go into a gym and think that exercise is, 20 minutes swanning around on the elliptical, and, a few push-ups and a few squats, and, that is exercise. And when you think the results that the body's really capable of, that's kind of far from exercise.
Oh yeah, I refer to that as the ticket puncher mentality. It's sort of like going to church and recycling. You do it. People do it because they think it makes them a good person, and if they get on the treadmill for 20 minutes, they punch their ticket and they met that requirement. But the body doesn't work that way. It needs to see something that's demanding an adaptive change of it, and that's what we're about providing.
So I'm sorry, I'm still intrigued about your gym. So give me a little insight as to some of the kit that's in your gym, your tools of pain, so to speak.
Yeah. So my racks of torture are largely Medex-based equipment, and in the UK, that would be Keyser equipment. They have a lot of centers there that use that equipment. And it's just really well-constructed equipment. It was invented by Arthur Jones, the man that originally invented Nautilus that was so popular in the 70s and 80s. But the nice things about those pieces of equipment is that are adjustable in multiple planes. So you go to your average gym and you have a selectorized pin selection piece of equipment. You generally have one plane of adjustment, and that's an up and down on the seat. These will have 3 or 4 different planes of adjustment. So what I am literally able to do is to build the machine around the client's biomechanics rather than trying to reverse engineer the client into the machine. So that I can set them up with very good biomechanics, and that does 2 things. One is it promotes safety, but 2, it loads the muscle in a very effective way, so there's really nowhere to hide from the resistance. The other neat thing about the Medex relative to other pieces of equipment is, one is it's very low in friction. And friction in exercise equipment can be a very detrimental thing. The friction is added to the resistance that you're lifting. It's subtracted from the resistance that you're lowering. And the negative portion is a very productive portion of the exercise. And if you're making it exceedingly easy and the amount you can lift for the negative is compromised by the friction, then you're kind of double undermining the productivity of the exercise. But the thing I like most about those pieces of equipment is when you're lifting weights, you got to remember you're doing work is force times distance. And a lot of people that manufacture weight training equipment save money by using a small weight stack, but moving it through a very long stroke. So a lot of commercial equipment will have weight stacks that change in 10-pound increments, but they move through a 3-foot stroke so that the smallest incremental change in weight you can make when you're trying to progress someone is 30 foot-pounds. Now these Medex pieces, they all move a stroke of about 1 foot. And they have a 500-pound weight stack, but they have a secondary weight stack that goes in 2-pound increments. So I can progress a client in increments as small as 2 foot-pounds instead of 30 foot-pounds. So if you have an elderly person or a very petite female, you can actually progressively increase the resistance from session to session without overwhelming them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
So on a pull-down machine, your average female will go in, she'll plug 50 pounds on it. but each repetition is going to be 150 foot-pounds of work. Well, if you plug that onto 60 pounds for the next progression, all of a sudden you've jumped from 150 foot-pounds to 180 foot-pounds. And that's going to be too much of a jump, and you're not going to get the appropriate set duration because the weight's simply too heavy. So these small incremental changes really help you milk someone along in terms of progressively becoming stronger. Also, let's say you have a very strong and advanced subject. They're approaching the upper limits of their strength potential. Well, when that starts to happen, when the curve starts to flatten out, the only way to continue to progress is through what's called microloading, by little tiny increments at a time. Otherwise, a big change really can kind of, dump you off the truck, so to speak. So there's all those components in the equipment. Also, a lot of the equipment's been specially modified. It's been retrofitted with cams that vary the resistance so that your experience as the user is it feels very flat. It feels as hard at any point in the range of motion as it does in any other, as opposed to some other pieces of equipment will have a horrible sticking point where it seems, unbelievably hard to get over that hump. And then you have a range of motion where the weight feels inappropriately light. We've tried to take all that out so the muscle is always continuously loaded. Go ahead.
So would you use these pieces of equipment? Because when I think of high intensity training in the UK, there'll be an awful amount of trainers listening to this thinking now in terms of how they perform their HIIT training. We might use like kettlebell complexes, barbell complexes, using concept rowers, aerodyne bikes, steppers, things that you can load in that kind of metabolic pathway. Are you doing that alongside this, or are you creating pretty much your whole session by working against resistance through various planes?
By simply doing the resistance training, moving quickly from one machine to the next and covering the whole body, you get that sort of high intensity interval training metabolic effect, but to an even more pronounced degree. I mean, it's really shocking the degree of metabolic effect that accumulates as you move quickly from one machine to the other. The neat thing about it, though, is instead of doing a kettlebell complex or a barbell complex, the weight is being lifted in a very controlled fashion. You initiate the movement of lifting the weight as gradually as you possibly can. And because we've eliminated any significant humps in the road or sticking points, so to speak, you don't have to get a running start to make it over the sticking point. The resistance curve feels very even to you, so there's no real hard sticking point that you got to get momentum to get over. So we have the client initiate force production very, very gradually and then continue to exert in a continuous fashion. What happens then is the actual repetition speed is quite slow, somewhere between a 5 and 10 second excursion on the lifting and the lowering. When you lower, when the weight stack, because you barely touch, you immediately turn around, you don't unload, and you stay under continuous load. Mm-hmm. The cool thing about this is, as you're doing that, because of the accumulating fatigue, you're becoming weaker and weaker. Mm-hmm. And what's happening is the window between your capability and the weight you've selected starts to close as you fatigue. Until that window is completely closed, you can no longer produce movement with that weight. Your force output is not great enough to exceed the weight. That's muscular failure. But we have you continue to push at that point for several seconds beyond that. But the cool thing about this is, as the intensity is going up, your fatigue is accumulating and your force is going down. So the higher the level of exertion, the movement is actually becoming safer and safer. As opposed to doing some sort of kettlebell or barbell complex that involves significant skill, as you're fatiguing, your skill starts to deteriorate. And when you're doing a skill-based movement in that way, your chances of your form getting sloppy and having an injury actually goes up as you're fatiguing. So this is kind of unique in that the harder you work, the safer it gets. And it's
Okay.
sort of an interesting paradox that makes it very unique as opposed to traditional, kettlebell, CrossFit, high intensity intervals.
Hmm.
In order to bring the intensity higher there, the force has to go up along with it, and thus the risk for injury as well.
Okay. So, I mean, this is one of the reasons I think CrossFit gets a huge amount of negativity in that the way that they load their sort of high intensity sessions are through exercises that become very unsafe very quickly in a state of fatigue. A barbell snatch is quite a dangerous exercise when you're tired because it involves a huge amount of motor control and a huge amount of
Correct.
joint control. So, I agree with you 100% on that. So, just delving into kind of because when kind of trainers try to think of concepts, and everyone included, we like to package things from learning that we've previously done. Now, high intensity training, some people will be thinking right now is them, let's say even going onto a cycle bike and training as hard as they can, again, and repeating it. What you just described in terms of muscular movement sounds very much like the old Mike Mentzer way of training, in that it's one set to failure and then you're moving on and you're doing the next thing one set to failure.
That's correct. And Mike Mentzer was a big influence of mine. What's happened is, since that time, there's been a lot of refinement of that. And a lot of times, single set to failure training really will not work out if it's not done in the correct environment with the correct equipment. If it has a bad sticking point, muscular failure in and of itself is not necessarily a good stimulus. For instance, if you have a bad piece of equipment, let's say you're doing an overhead press, and for anyone watching on YouTube, as you go in through the overhead press, when your elbows and your shoulders both reach 90 degrees, your force output to the weight is greatly diminished because of leverage factors.
Yep.
That becomes a huge sticking point. So on each repetition, as you go through that sticking point, as you fatigue, it's harder and harder to get over that speed bump. On rep one, you have a fixed speed bump, which is that sticking point. On rep one, it's like you're pushing a Mini Cooper over the speed bump.
Mm-hmm.
But by rep 6 or 7, it's like you're pushing an 18-wheeler over the speed bump.
Mm-hmm.
And your muscular failure can occur simply because your fatigue has interfaced with that sticking point, and the sticking point has caused you to fail, even though you may not have produced a very deep level of fatigue in the muscle or inroad. An inroad is simply the difference between your starting strength and your finishing strength. You want to have fatigued yourself to a certain level of depth. And muscular failure may not define a meaningful level of depth if the movement you're doing involves a very significant sticking point. So a lot of what we've done in the protocol is to select movements or modify equipment in such a way that that sticking point is not the rate limiting factor. When you bite the dust in my place, it's not because you can't overcome the sticking point in a piece of equipment that you're using, whether that be a barbell or a machine or whatever. You are reaching failure because the muscle is very, very deeply spent.
Okay. Now
That's a different kind of approach than just saying single set to failure, because a lot of times failure does not represent a significant level or depth of fatigue.
Wow, fascinating. I take it this theory you've obviously expanded and represented in your book, Body by Science, and you've tried to take movements and exercises that this can be applied to on a widespread level, because you just talked about your gym and you've got equipment that's especially made to this, and I know that everyone's sitting there on the podcast listening to this now going, so how do I do that in my gym?
Yeah. And, really in the book, what we focused on is to at least get people started just on very basic movements, or what the book refers to as a big five, which is basically just a leg press, an upper body pull in the horizontal plane, an upper body push in the horizontal plane, an upper body pull in the vertical plane, and an upper body push in the vertical plane, or stated differently, leg press, compound row or rowing motion, chest press or bench press, pull down, and overhead press. And the reason we selected those, although they do have some significant sticking point, is in terms of motor skills, it is those are very simple movements to perform. So when someone is first starting off in their protocol, they can take all of their mental energy to focus on hard effort rather than coordinating movement.
Sure.
And that's the purpose of it. But over time, and it's kind of covered in the book, you can bring in, more specialized or complex movements than that. But the real key is to understand that exercise done properly is a stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
And that stimulus acts upon your body, which is an organism. And that organism has received that stimulus as a negative threat. And the stimulus in this case is the sudden occurrence of a very deep level of fatigue. And the adaptive response to that threat is to synthesize more muscle and all of the metabolic subsystems that support the mechanical working of that muscle. But make no mistake, the exercise never directly causes the adaptation. The exercise just acts upon your body. And then if your body has adequate time and resources to recover and supercompensate, you make the adaptive response.
In a second, I want to rewind because we've kind of missed out some essential stuff, I think. You just mentioned a great point about recovery and supercompensation. Now, you told us about your gym. People come in, they're like 15, 20 minutes, high intensity. How do you, as a general rule, program that in your eyes to allow for enough recovery and that supercompensation to occur?
Well, in the earliest stages of training, when the clients first start, in the first 16 to 20 weeks, it's very, very easy. Initially, you can train a client twice a week without much difficulty at all and without ever having to worry about exceeding their recovery ability. And what we like to see on the training record, remember, if we have to, we can progress in small increments. We can microload if we need to. Although in the early stages, you really don't. It's kind of hard to keep up with the client's improvement. But what you want to see if recovery has been adequate for supercompensation to occur is improvements in strength on every set of every exercise, every workout. And the way that we record that is we have the resistance that we selected for the client. And the client is blinded to the resistance. They don't know what they're lifting. And then we emphasize that the weight is a tool simply to load the muscle and fatigue it as rapidly and deeply as possible. But we record how long that is with a stopwatch. And we get a time under tension or a time under load. So that is a time span during which, at that given weight, they went to failure. And that's a measurement of time. And what we'll see is they come back the next week. If we pin that same weight, they're going to greatly outrun that time because they're significantly stronger. So we pin a significantly heavier weight, and then we want to see them fall somewhere within a similar time under load where they reach fatigue. And what you'll see is that in the early stages, it's very hard to keep up with them. You'll jump them 10 or 20 foot-pounds at a time, and they'll still outrun you in terms of how long it takes them to reach complete muscular failure. As they get somewhere between the 12th and 20th week, that curve becomes less steep, and we have to start progressing in smaller increments. Instead of 10 or 20 foot-pounds, maybe 4 or 6. After the 20-week mark, rather than 4 or 6, it may be 2 foot-pounds at a time. But you can see very easily on their workout record when you have not allowed adequate recovery. Because what will happen is they will immediately stop progressing on all movements. Two out of the 5 will be stalled or retrogress even. And at that point, you simply have to increase the number of rest days between sessions to account for that.
Hmm.
So in the early days of training, a client can come easily on a Monday and Thursday. But within 8 to 10 workouts, they're going to be better suited by coming Monday, Friday, and Wednesday. And then not long after that, they settle into once a week training, which for most clients is kind of where they level out at. If there are significant lifestyle issues, if someone's working a rotating schedule, has several small children, their sleep's disrupted, or they're stressed, those sessions may push out as long as 12 days between workout sessions for progress to be ongoing. But it is easy on the workout record in terms of programming to see when you've not allowed enough recovery.
Wow. That's fascinating because obviously, I don't know anyone that's training that little. And I suppose what I need to clarify at this point is, the avatar for your business, that your perfect customer, is this literally the people that they just want to stay in shape, they want to have longevity, they want to feel good, they want to look good in their clothes. Is that your ideal customer?
Not necessarily. I mean, and everyone assumes that this is just sort of the quick and dirty way to get reasonably fit,
Hmm.
and that it's not really the way to maximize your genetic potential in terms of either muscular size or strength. But I found that if someone has the genetic potential, this is a way of going about it, and it's probably the most efficient way to go about it. So I don't like, um, and this is commonly done for people that have found the results by training at greater volumes. I don't like the representation of it. It's like, oh, it's good for the businessman that just wants to stay in shape. But if you really want to get jacked, well, you're going to have to train 4 days a week, 2 hours at a time. That doesn't really pan out when you have someone that's genetically capable of producing those kind of results. You can get there with this. And I think what happens is the reason you get a lot more of that, if you really want to be jacked, you're going to have to work out this much, is sort of a selection bias, because the common denominator for those kind of results are you have to have the genotype to produce that kind of body. And then, a lot of people are influenced by what they see on the cover of a fitness magazine, whether it be a bodybuilding magazine or a men's fitness or a men's health or whatever, as to what the ideal is. And what the ideal is on the cover of those magazines is a combination of genetics that allow it and an extreme attention to dietary issues to reach a peak on 1 or 2 days out of a year for a photo shoot. So those are different things. But to answer your question more shortly is, no, this is for everyone. And my prototypical client is anywhere from a senior with advanced Parkinson's disease or post-stroke to a 15-year-old athlete or a young adult that's wanting to get jacked. I can apply this protocol and get results along that entire spectrum.
Interesting, very interesting. So I don't want to run out of show time because I think I've covered like one question on my list so far, and we've
I'm
just gone
long-winded.
for it.
That's my fault.
No, it's been fascinating because I think I've just uncovered some really cool stuff. Anyway, right, you got into all of this via your journey, which everyone does. My work has led me to a certain degree as a result of my journey, and I thank my journey for that. You used to, back in the day, be very much an endurance-based trainer, from what I hear, and you made this switch. Now, what happened?
That's not exactly true.
No?
My sport was bicycle motocross or BMX,
Okay.
and that is a power sprint based sport.
Hmm.
If you go on YouTube and watch some of it, just put in BMX racing, you can watch what it was. It's a sprint based um, bicycle race over obstacles, and it's sort of like motocross. But the typical lap time is 35 to 40 seconds. So it was a power-based sport. Now, there was a period of time when I was in college where I did do road racing, cycling.
Mm-hmm.
But that was not where my natural talents were. I was not as good as I was at the sprint-based sport.
Sure.
So it really was more of a power-based sport. But the thing with BMX was it was a combination of power and endurance issues because there were just so many. There were quarterfinals, semifinals, main events, and the main events had 3 races. There were just so many heats during the day that you were having bouts of high intensity effort, sometimes with not a really long recovery interval between bouts. And it required a pretty intensive form of conditioning to be good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what drove my interest in this high intensity realm, because that's what got me the most bang for the buck.
Okay, so there was obviously a point where you noticed that the different training you were doing was having a different effect on your body, and I'm assuming that as you maybe went to the road cycling and drifted back somewhere, you kind of started to notice personal changes, and then you said, "Well, hang on, I need to really invest some time in looking at this because I've seen the changes physically in myself."
Yeah, I guess the thing that really first hooked me was, when I was a teenager and I first was racing BMX, was just when I first said, well, let's, try doing some weight training and see if this makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when you first start out, that's when you're on the steep part of the curve. And I kept the fact that I was doing this completely secret from any of my competitors. And it was astounding what a difference it made.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, I was hooked. And of course, then I got hooked in such a way that the natural inclination was more is better. And I started doing more and more because I got hooked on what a difference that it made. And in the process of doing so, I became overtrained.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't recover. Instead of getting stronger, I was getting weaker and more fatigued. And then I started to suck. But it turns out that I actually, at that time, the Arthur Jones high-intensity influence Nautilus gyms were starting to pop up like mushrooms all over the countryside. One close to where I live opened up, and I bartered my janitorial services for a membership at this place because I certainly couldn't afford it at the time. And when I was cleaning up one Saturday morning, the training manual that Arthur Jones had written, the Nautilus training bulletin, was sitting on the owner's desk, and I picked it up and looked at it and started flipping through it. And the owner says, "Oh, if you want, you can take that. They sent me several copies. I got multiple. You can take it with you." I took it home and read it from cover to cover, and it was, the information in it was just awe-inspiring. It completely clarified for me the issue of what exercise was, how exercise related to the body, and how the results that could be produced were transferable and beneficial to almost any athletic endeavor. And then once I kind of knew better what in the hell I was doing and how to dose it out in a way that was result producing, then the astounding effect from that kind of training was reborn for me again. And then from there on, it's just been a refinement of that all the way through. And as I went through college and medical school and residency and became more and more time pinched, I was more and more excited to find that I could maintain this kind of conditioning with a minimal time input, and not a minimal time input from the standpoint of, oh, this is something I can get away with. A minimal time input from the standpoint of, this is actually what is required to produce the best results.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very empowering for someone whose available time for training, just out of the necessity of life, was getting narrowed down more and more.
That's really interesting because I myself train and play rugby. So for me, it's very much, we've always got the rugby conditioning in there. That's a Tuesday and a Thursday night and then a Saturday game time. And it's, it can be seriously intensive stuff. It's high impact. And I've always dabbled with how much I can train. There's in the weight room to benefit the rugby, and there's been periods of time where I've tried to do 4 days, I've tried to do 3 days, I've gone with 2 days, and then I've gone with 2 days and then tried to increase for 3 days, and I just keep coming back for 2 days in the weight room. If I push that anymore, I slowly start to under recover. And a big theme that I've tried to adopt on this show is please just try and be ever so slightly undertrained, because as soon as you try and push it, that risk of
Right.
overtraining becomes ever more prevalent, and then your sleep suffers, your energy suffers, your libido can start, everything hormonally and the physiological interactions then start to suffer.
Absolutely. Anytime that I'm consulting with athletes, I always tell them that, particularly if you're a competitive athlete, that your training always has to be reverse engineered around your competitive schedule in such a way that you show up to the competitive event completely recovered and super compensated.
Mm-hmm.
And if that means you shut down your training an entire week, 10 or 12 days before that competitive event, so be it. Because you really want to be at the event as strong and capable as you possibly can. And you really do have to build your training around your competitive life and not your competitive life around your training. You can't just be locked into, I'm going to do this on this day and this day. You really have to look at when the important events are and then back engineer from there so that recovery is accounted for. And you make a very good point there about being slightly undertrained. I think the way I like to put it is, if you really want to show up superhuman, you have to acknowledge that you are only human.
Mm-hmm.
And by making sure that you pay attention to the recovery side of the equation is how you are going to best perform. You got to remember, stimulus, organism, response. The stimulus, the exercise, is a negative thing. It digs a hole in the ground. The organism receives that stimulus and it makes an adaptive response. We fill that hole back up, plus a little bit more on top. But if you come back and dig again before you fill that hole up again, you just dig a deeper and deeper hole. So, a lot of people in the training realm, we really, really focus on protocol and programming and how can we refine this and make it as hard and as meaningful as possible. But I really think that people really need to focus on the recovery side of the equation. Am I fully hydrated? Am I getting adequate sleep? What's my nutrition like? Unless the recovery side of the equation is getting at least as much attention, if not more than the training side, then you're not going to get the full benefit of the training.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. So I need to dig a little bit into the physiology of HIIT, because I think that's obviously one area that's stimulated your interest even more, especially being a man of medicine. So I've mentioned you use the word myokines quite a bit. I've pronounced that properly in your eyes, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so myokines are something that I understand to be released as a result of training,
Yes.
depending on the training stimulus. How are for you, these seem to be playing a key role in some of the benefit of HIIT training. I suppose, A, what are these? And B, why do we need to think about them in terms of HIIT and its benefits to physiology and our results?
Yeah, I think the reason I just lately I've got a real hard on for the myokine thing, and I've gone down this rabbit hole with it, is because throughout the years of my training, I always thought this is much greater than the sum of its parts. There's something bigger going on here than just, in terms of body composition and body fat percentage. There's way more going on here than just calories in, calories out, energy balance sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's way more going on here in terms of the health benefits of strength training that have been laid out in the scientific literature. Its effects on metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, body composition. It's just been disproportionate to anything that you could traditionally use to account for it. And in the past few years, what's going on inside that black box that gives this big superior output on the other side has been revealed to be these myokines. And to put, in the biggest nutshell I can put it is, we used to think of skeletal muscle as just a tissue in the body that produced movement. Mm-hmm. But what we've come to find out is that it is probably the most active endocrine organ in our body. And when muscle is doing activity, particularly activity of a meaningful intensity, it releases these chemical messengers, cytokines, which, because they are released from muscle, the Greek term for muscle being myo, they've been called myokines. They go out, and these endocrine-like molecules signal other tissues in the body to behave in a certain way. And you don't have to remember all the different variety of myokines, but they do a lot of neat things. For instance, there is interleukin 6. It's released from skeletal muscle during high-intensity activity, and it does a lot of cool things. And one of the coolest things it does is it upregulates glucose transport and glucose utilization. It also upregulates fatty acid mobilization and utilization within the cell. So it has a profound effect on insulin sensitivity and metabolic health, which is the 180-degree polar opposite of what occurs with the metabolic syndrome. So it is a mirror image of that. And interleukin 6 basically, in a 180-degree fashion, contradicts and countermands the cytokine signals that come from adipose tissue. So in terms of restoring insulin sensitivity, leptin sensitivity, it's very powerful in that regard. There's also an interleukin 15, which the genetic expression of determines a lot of what your muscle is going to look like. A lot of people will have very large muscles because of a particular type of expression. A lot of people will have less large muscles but more powerful muscles, almost paradoxically. But the important thing about interleukin 15 is that it does a lot of things that affect body composition and body leanness. It inhibits fat storage. It accelerates fat mobilization. It produces something in the mitochondria called uncoupling protein, which is what turns white fat to brown fat. It basically, rather than turning energy into ATP that's used by your body or is stored, it actually throws it off as heat. So you have an endocrine signal that goes out that signals for an ideal body composition. So it signals for the loss of excess body fat, and it does so in a way that is irrespective of the energy balance of calories in, calories out. There's just almost too many to describe effects on an endocrine basis that these myokines do, but seem to explain so many of the medical benefits of strength training. And I think they are the underpinning for, I think at least in a public health sense, getting the populace to just lift weights would probably have the most profound public health impact in the world of medicine of anything that you could do. And I think it's just a very ripe area for research, and I think it's going to reveal a lot of benefits that we never even imagined from resistance training.
Fascinating. So, I'm now trying to piece this together myself. Other people listening are. We get this release of these myokines during HIIT-based training. We obviously get it in other forms of training.
Yes.
Now, let me clarify that you're not saying that other forms of training are negative because they don't get this, because obviously every bit of training has its stimulus and every bit of training has a purpose.
Correct.
You're trying to almost package that the minimum effective dose for an individual can be seen in this type of training because we can see these physiological and metabolic advantages.
Yes, you got to understand, these myokines have been with us for millennia.
Mm-hmm.
We have evolved them out of our hunter-gatherer past. They are, very complex evolutionary adaptive hormones. So to say that only my kind of training is that's nonsense. Okay. CrossFit does it, kettlebells does it, high intensity interval training does it, going out for a jog does it, playing rugby does it. But where I see the benefit in the approach I'm taking with this is all forms of exercise have a consequence and they have a risk benefit ratio to them. If you can entrain these sort of metabolic advantages in a way that is not going to produce significant wear and tear and not produce injury, because that's the only thing that exercise can directly do to the body.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is indirect: stimulus, organism, response. The only thing exercise can directly do to the body is cause injury. And that's what you want to avoid. So I'm 53 years old now, and I don't have any aching joints. I don't have any limitations on my activity whatsoever. And that's rare for someone that's had a training career that started at age 13 or 14 all the way up to 53. Someone's usually, had a rotator cuff injury, a slap injury, tweaked their back, herniated some discs, done something. And what I'm here to tell people is that you can get all of these benefits, and you can get them over the long term, over the span of your life, and do it in a way that's not going to take yourself out of the game. You're going to live to train another day. Mm. And that, a lot of times for younger people,
oh dear, bear with me.
Yeah, the video just popped out there.
Second. God, sorry, there was a little carry on.
Okay, but in any case, I think the real benefit of my approach is that I can entrain these sort of advantages without incurring either the wear and tear risk for injury over time or the acute injury that occurs in a single session. And I can do it in a manner that is time efficient and produces the best possible result.
I was going to say, there's something definitely in this, because looking at you on YouTube, you look about 40. You look at, in great shape. If I don't
tell you, I hate doing
myself.
These YouTube things because I got a face for radio, but
too harsh on himself.
It's, the truth is, Biz, that and I figured this out as I was, as you go up, you get older. It's like there really is almost nothing about getting older that doesn't suck. But if you train well and you eat well and you pay attention to stuff, it doesn't have to suck. I mean, yeah, it sucks that, when I wipe my neck, the skin goes, but, that sucks. But, you can have a very high level of physiologic headroom. You can perform at extraordinary levels all the way until old age. And the way most people in modern society age is they ramp up, they reach peak in their teenage years, and then it's this gradual decline on this slippery slope that leads to the scooter store and then the nursing home, and then, a miserable death in the ICU. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be, and I see that every day. And I got to tell you, that way of living absolutely sucks. People are sicker than you could ever imagine. And they're sick, they're dying for decades. And that's not a way to live. But it is the technology is extremely simple, and all it takes is a little attention to detail and really just giving a shit to put in the effort and pay attention to your diet. And you can have a level of physiologic functioning that's very high all the way until old age and until you just drop. It doesn't have to be this long decline in the nursing home and the ICU. It can be just going all along at a very high level until you just drop. And that's the way to live.
I agree. I hate it when I listen to people say, even at like mid 30s, they're like, "Oh, I'm past it. I can't do this. I'm too old for that." And I'm just like, rubbish. Absolutely
Yeah,
rubbish.
yeah,
Like, there's no way I'm going to be in your situation when I'm 35, 40, 50. I'm gonna keep at the top of my game. Anyway, at this point in time on the podcast, I think I've got two options. I could dive even further down the rabbit hole because you have a great inspiring knowledge of this subject, and I really like that and appreciate it. But neither of us have got an infinite amount of time, unfortunately. So
yeah.
I want people to take away almost like a closing wrap up of your thoughts. Now, you can imagine what people do listening to this podcast. They're people that train 4, 5, maybe 6 times a week, mixed conditioning, a lot of weight training, mixture of high intensity and long duration. I can imagine there's people out there that maybe are training too much, maybe they're young, maybe they can handle it. From the information that you've given today, what do you want people to almost take away? What's the soundbite that's going to help them almost?
I think the soundbite is this: your human physiology does not give a shit about the Protestant work ethic. Okay, more and harder is not necessarily the way. Harder definitely works as long as you do it in a way where you're not going to harm yourself. The intensity has to be high. But once you've triggered the stimulus, you've got to get out of your own way and allow your body the opportunity to recover and to synthesize the adaptive change. Look, if you want to put on a pound of muscle, go down the grocery store and pick up a pound of beef and look at it and tell yourself, my body has to synthesize this de novo. Okay, if you keep going back and just doing something neurotically over and over again, your body's not going to have a chance to make that pound. Okay, you've got to apply the stimulus, leave your body alone so it'll do its thing. Okay, so this whole idea of that you can just pound your way through this, you're probably experiencing right now doesn't work. It just rags you out and wears you out and makes you prone to injury. Give high intensity, brief, and infrequent training a chance. Just try it and see what happens. Even if you do it just for 2 or 3 weeks, if it doesn't work for you, you feel like I can't stand it, you can always go back. But just give it a shot and see what happens. I think you'll be impressed.
Fascinating. I've really enjoyed this. I've stayed enthralled throughout the whole thing, and it's
great. I'm glad.
I can't say it's a topic I thought I was going to be that engaged by because I suppose it almost seems simple. It seems like a simple concept in terms of how trainers talk about it in the UK. So I think you've given people a lot of food for thought today, and I really want to push them to go and find out more because I think there's a lot of interested brains out there now. Your book, Body by Science, is probably available on Amazon.
You can get that on Amazon. A lot of stuff that comes up. There's also a question and answer book that's linked to it, and that one, when you read the book, you'll be stuck with. Have a lot of questions. It triggers a lot more thoughts. The question and answer book answers a lot of that.
Okay.
But if you want to go further, there's the blog is bodybyscience.net.
Okay.
And then there is drmcguff.com. drmcguff.com. I can be accessed through there for consultation and things of that nature. There's also a link to lots of different YouTube videos so you can see the kind of workouts that we're talking here. There's some video instruction.
Awesome.
So if people want to just kind of get a better idea, because I know just talking on a podcast, it's hard to really understand what I'm talking about. But if you want to see it on a video, you can kind of go there and just check it out and see what you think.
And how do people find that video? Is that via your personal website?
Yeah, if you go to drmcguff.com, there are different sections there, and there's a little subheading called Watch.
Okay.
And that links to a YouTube channel for, all sorts of videos in this paradigm.
That is brilliant. I think you're going to get a lot of people watching those videos because
I hope so. That'd be cool.
I was talking through it and I was like, I really want to visualize this. It's kind of making sense, but I have to visualize it. It's like I was shaking a maraca and I wanted it to happen. Anyway, thank you very much for giving up your time today. It's very,
My
very
pleasure.
kind. It's been a pleasure having you. People, you've heard his links, go and find them out. They'll also be in the show description on iTunes and Stitcher. As always, if you've enjoyed the show, please do me the massive honour of leaving a review on iTunes or Stitcher. It's the main way that the show grows, and the other way is you sharing it on Facebook, with Twitter, with friends and family. It's the key way we can get this message to help other people and to help people with their health and performance. I will be back on the show next week with Rachel. We'll be doing a Q&A with all your questions. And then the week after that, hopefully, I will have examine.com on the podcast to talk about supplemental science. Dr. McGuff, again, thank you very much.
It was my pleasure. Had a blast.
To everyone listening, I will see you next week. Ciao. Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 121. Today, I have a very special guest. I've caught him on his travels to London on his book tour. I am not sure if you've heard of this guy before, but this guy is like the Australian Jamie Oliver. And you know how much of a fan I am of Jamie Oliver. He's an absolute legend.